Professor, welcome to our Global Reflection series. It is our great pleasure to host you all today in this session of Global Reflection panel series. We are happy to have participants joining us from different parts of the world and mostly from Turkey. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by leading intellectual whose work has profoundly shaped contemporary debates on coloniality, modernity, and global epistemic hierarchies and decolonization, of course, Professor Walter Mignolo. Professor Mignolo, welcome to our Global Reflection series.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much all the people who are attending it.
Yeah, thank you. And I will just shortly introduce you, and then we are going to discuss our main theme today. So Professor Mignolo is one of the foundational figures of decolonial studies. His extensive scholarship on coloniality of power, border thinking, and the geopolitics of knowledge has transformed how we understand global structures of domination and possibilities of epistemic justice. His contributions have inspired generations of scholars, activists, and artists who seek to imagine alternative horizons beyond the modern and colonial frameworks. So Professor Mignolo is Distinguished Emeritus Professor at Duke University. He is the former Director of Center for Global Studies and Humanities. He was a research associate at the Simon Bolivar Andine University till 2020, and honorary research associate at Center for Indian Studies in South Africa. Professor Mignolo is affiliated to many universities in the different parts of the world, from Africa to Asia to mostly Latin America and the United States. Before we begin, I want to briefly introduce the purpose of the Global Reflection series and Decolonial Talks. Within this panel series, Enstitü Sosyal aims to create a productive intellectual environment where leading experts from diverse fields address persistent issues in education, society, economy, and global issues. And Decolonization Forum and Decolonization Talks just started, which is initiated by Enstitü Sosyal as well. This session is also part of our broader preparation for the Decolonization Forum 2026, which will take place on 11-12 May in Istanbul. This year's theme in the Decolonization Forum is Decolonizing Knowledge Production and Circulation. The forum aims to rethink knowledge production and circulation from a decolonial perspective. It brings together scholars, artists, activists, and institutions and journalists from across the world to address structural inequalities, epistemic dependencies, and the ongoing legacies of coloniality in global academia, media, culture, and political life. Professor Mignolo is also a scientific member of the Decolonization Forum, and these Decolonization Talks is also part of Decolonization Forum and Global Reflection series. Again, Professor Mignolo, very much welcome to our Decolonization Talks, and you are our first guest for these online Decolonization Talks. And I want to just, before starting our main theme of the decolonial consensus within the context of the global paradigms, I think we should start with some concepts of the decolonization. That's why my first question would be, what is the decolonization and what does decolonial mean in the contemporary world? And why do you think these concepts have become so significant for our understanding of contemporary world issues, and why it is so significant for the academia? Thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Thank you again for the, not just for the invitation, but also for the kind of the dialogue we have been entertaining in the past, I don't know, past month or so. And also for this kind of conversation on the title of, the title is not my title, the title is a kind of emerging the conversation. So I don't have an answer to tell you if the decolonial consensus is possible or necessary. I want to just take the question as a question and invite you also to reflect. And I think that this is the idea of this previous fora before the big one. So about your question, Selçuk, I have to tell the people attending that I come from a specific decolonial school, which is the South American decolonial school. We have a specific vocabulary that is not universal. It's the vocabulary that we use that is consistent with the conceptual structure that we utilize, and I will talk about that. Um, and um, and the second is that I am a semiotician by training. So I pay a lot of attention to words, to etymology, not just to the meaning of the word today, but the etymology. Where are they coming from? What is the kind of the complexity, etc. So going into the question of the decolonial or the decolonization, we have the first thing I want to say is that we have to think about the distinction or the difference, so you want to put it, what decolonization meant in the second half of the 20th century during the Cold War, and what decolonization may mean after the Cold War and in the 20th century. So that is the first question. We cannot forget the Cold War because there are two things there. The goal was to send the settler colonizer home and to find the nation state ruled by the natives. And that was a victory, but also was a misery because the nation state, the colonial nation state, um, was already Jesus Christ, was already what I was saying. The nation state was already a tool of modernity to colonize after the 19th century. But it was a victory because they managed to kind of to send the colonizer home. But at the same time, there is a wealth of thought that emerged in that. From Gandhi in India at the beginning of the 20th century to Lumumba, to Biko, to Cabral, all these, Lumumba, Cabral, etc., Fanon, Césaire. There is a well of thought there that is our kind of our grounding, our thinking grounding. Latin America was different there because Latin America at the time, I mean, our independence or decolonization was in the 19th century. So the second half of the 20th century, what we're discussing was dependency theory. Dependency theory was political and economic, but then was extended at every domain, a cultural dependency too. And that is where Quijano entered in at the beginning of after the collapse of the Soviet Union, introducing the concept of coloniality. Coloniality didn't exist. Everybody was talking about modernity. But Quijano showed us that coloniality was the darker side of modernity, or the hidden side of modernity. That modernity is a rhetoric of salvation, it's a bunch of narrative, it's not a historical period. It's a historical period defined by the bunch of narrative created in Europe. And that is what kind of Eurocentric. Not because it's in Europe, because the Eurocentric is just to the interest and the benefit of Europe. So that is what kind of Quijano began to see, even if he came from Marxism, that the relevance of the narrative, in that sense, he was closer to Gramsci. But Gramsci was not, of course, talking about the colonization experience in the third world. So coloniality, when he introduced coloniality, has to redefine the concept of decolonization. What decolonization means now. Well, so we have a series of concept to review, right? Because we have modernity and modernization. Modernity is an horizon. Modernization is how that horizon is implemented in different moments, different places, different time. Modernization in Latin America is not the same as modernization in Africa. It's not like modernization in Asia. and depending also the kind of the imperial dominant power at the time. So we have modernity, modernization, coloniality, colonization. Coloniality is the horizon. Colonization is how that horizon is implemented in Africa and Latin America, etc. Anti-coloniality is an horizon. Anti-colonization is how the coloniality is implemented in Turkey, in China, in South Africa, in Latin America, etc. So that is the decolonial. That complex thing we call the decolonial.
So,
But
Professor,
yeah.
can I intervene just here because you refer to Turkey and China and some countries who has not colonial history, like because in Turkey, if you ask, they say, okay, we don't have the colonial history because like after the Ottoman Empire, there was a nation salvation war and modern Turkey established. But from your understanding of the coloniality, which is very much related to modernization as well, so can you a bit explain this one as well? Because we have more Turkish audience, so that might be very much original.
Thank you very much for the question. Very, very, very important. Neither Russia nor China or Japan or even Turkey went through settler colonialism like India, like South America, like Africa, North and South. But they didn't escape coloniality. And that is the importance of the concept of coloniality. Coloniality takes the name of colonization, but can be implemented without settled colonialism. And that, I mean, we can review the history of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. We can review the history of China. We can review the history of the Ottoman Sultanate and that, and we will see that. And an example is Ataturk. What Ataturk is trying to do when the kind of the Ottoman Sultanate dismember to have a nation state, right? So that you see how modernity, coloniality impinge all over the places without settled colonialism. And that is why colonialism, in the sense of the 19th century, the second half of the 20th century, is over, but coloniality is not over, it's all over. And it's all over today in us in a different way. And that is one of the tasks of decoloniality today. Decoloniality has two tasks, two horizons. One is the analysis, the analytic of two fundamental concepts for us. One is the colonial will to power, because Schopenhauer and Nietzsche talk to will to power, but the will to power they were talking about was the bourgeois will to power. The bourgeois will to power that took over the world in the 19th and 20th century. And the second is the conceptual, the colonial matrix of power. The colonial matrix of power, I cannot explain it, it's a little bit complex, but I will summarize by saying that the colonial matrix of power is the instrument of the colonial will to power. The colonial will to power, just having the will is not enough, need an instrument. So one of the tasks of the horizon of decoloniality is the analytic of the colonial metric of power. How was formed in the 16th century, how changed, how was transformed, how to dominate, who controlled it between 1500 and 2000. 2000, we began to see something very, very interesting in a mess that we are involved today. I will be very brief here, but what happened is that Russia, the reorganization of Russia after Putin in 2000, the growth of China, the kind of connection with Iran, India is always kind of ambiguous, but the question is that especially China, and then with a link with Russia, began to dispute, not to dispute, to critique the colonial matrix of power. What they dispute, who controls it. And that, I think, is an important point that brings us to the question of the decolonial consensus.
Yes, absolutely. Professor, sorry for the again intervention because when I saw the London Consensus, which is released in 16th of October, which is quite new, because the again mostly Western academics who praise the Western system, revisiting Washington Consensus, and during that time I thought, okay, why not decolonial consensus? Would be center of the new discussion in our contemporary issues in the world politics, as you know, because which is very much fragmented. There are new discussions about multipolarity or the question about the American hegemony. So this question is rising a lot in academia, in media, in many other places. That's why you mentioned about Cold War period, which also let's say triggered to new discussions during that time about the decolonization, which is related to nation state modernization, very much complex period. But today we have most probably more complex situation right now because there are different perspectives. Again, Washington consensus is quite strong, and there is another discussion about Beijing consensus, and Moscow again became another pole of the world politics because of the Ukraine war, and most of the states in the world right now following the Moscow consensus as an example because warfare state, because war is at the center of the world politics right now, or Israel, because Israel started recolonization process. So the United States started discussion about the Greenland, Canada, and the other places, how to reoccupy these kind of places. So recolonization might be another discussion. That's why within these circumstances and within all these teams and the policies in this, it's not only team, these are the policies. So what would be decolonial consensus based on your academic and background all about all these discussions? Yeah, this floor is yours.
Well, two things. One is the decolonial consensus, and the other before the decolonial consensus is what you name recolonization. To answer both questions, I think we need a kind of to clarify the preliminary context, the circumstances. We are no longer in the 20th century, because in the 20th century, the dispute of the control of the colonial mixture of power was all Western. Spanish and Portuguese and Portugal lost the control to France and Netherlands and England, and then England lost the control to United States. That was a kind of family feud. The problem now is that de-Westernization began to be articulated precisely by two of those states that had not been colonized, had not been experienced settler colonialism, China and Russia. So I call that de-Westernization. So when Obama realized what was going on, he began a process of re-Westernization. And re-Westernization meant after 2008 that the West began to realize that that was no longer the only game in town. That has a kind of, and so it came that kind of the pivot to the Pacific, right? That is kind of the 2008. So I think that what Trump is doing today is not recolonizing, is re-Westernizing.
Because there is not only game in the town,
but in a different way, because he's no longer neoliberal globalist. He's trying to kind of assert the power of United States no longer in the same term of the globalist neoliberal. But that recolonization is confronting decolonization, because it has to confront China, and it has to confront the question of Taiwan, and it has to confront the question of Russia and Ukraine. So the mess we see today is the conflict, including the Middle East. I mean, I cannot see Israel as separated from being a crucial agent of re-Westernization. And Netanyahu said it. Netanyahu said it. I mean, Israel is defending Western civilization.
Mhm.
Right? So the question, uh, now I say that because the second point with the consensus, that decolonization, decoloniality now and decolonization depend on how are we going to do, is relational, can no longer be thought as uh, by itself or only against decolonizing from Western imperialism. A lot of people talk about China neo-colonialism in Africa. Well, I would I would think a little bit about that before accusing China of neo-colonial. I don't want to defend China, but I don't want to accuse it either. But if we talk about China neo-colonialism in Africa, we are trying to understand, we have to understand the power differential still between re-Westernization that control not just the military, has a kind of upper hand in the economy, and have English to control the narrative. So China has to constantly confront the re-Westernization. And of course, re-Westernization has to confront the growth of China and the military growth of Russia, etc. But the power differential is still there. I call that the imperial difference. The decolonial consensus has to deal with the colonial difference. That will be another discussion. But what I want to say about that, about the decolonial consensus, is necessary. I won't take for granted that the colonial consensus is necessary. If it's
Mhm.
necessary, we have to argue why it's necessary. And if it's necessary, so the second question, is it possible? And if it's possible, what has to happen to make it work? So in a previous kind of draft note that I sent to Selçuk for this talk, I talk about
Sorry, by the way, Professor.
coalition and alliance. Huh?
Yeah, Professor. So you asked the key question, is it necessary and possible? But at the same time, we spoke that we are going to speak just 50 minutes to open the discussion. But we already spoke 30 minutes. But please answer this question. Is it necessary and is it possible? Then Q&A session is going to start. Yeah,
I,
please.
I can stop right there. Yeah, I
No,
mean,
no, please, because that's the key question. Decolonial consensus necessary, and is it possible? Yeah, please answer this one, and then question and answers session is going to start.
oh, okay. So first, the concept of consensus, because in the note I received from Selçuk and the team he's working with, the consensus was mentioned in relation to the Washington and the London consensus and the Moscow and the Beijing consensus. But there is a difference there. The Washington and London are re-Western consensus. It's a consensus to maintain the privilege of the West, while the Beijing and Moscow are the Western consensus. It's a consensus to kind of re-exist without following the orders of the West. So in that context, where is the decolonial consensus? Before going to the possible and necessary, what is located? It's located in relation to the de-Westernization and re-Westernization. However, re-Westernization and de-Westernization are a state-led project. The
Mhm.
decolonial at that moment is a project in the public sphere. By the public sphere, I talk about the social movement, about the university, about journalism, about museum, about all kind of activities that can help us in the public sphere to organize our life in relation to this kind of big conflict in which the decolonial at this point doesn't have much to say. Because we cannot go to Trump and say, Trump, we have a good idea here of the colonial consensus, or go to Jinping and say, hey, Jinping, we have a good idea here of the colonial consensus. At the level of the state, there is a different concern, a different discourse, a different horizon. So if a decolonial consensus is necessary, it has to be in the public sphere. And if it's possible, has to be in the public sphere. And it has to, the second point is, we have to work through coalition and alliances. And let me finish with a formula.
Yes.
We have been talking in the decolonial school about pluriversality. Because when we start talking about pluriversality, the postmodern was critiquing us because they said, well, we need the universal. And so we responded, okay, pluriversality as a universal project. And working on that, I would say the decolonial consensus as a pluriversal project. Because cannot be an institution from above. It has to be coalition horizontally. If it's possible, that is the only way I can see it, because if we put an institution that we kind of regulate the decolonial consensus, will be very modern, will be very imperial in the public sphere. So I stop there.
And I think that's formula words to highlight, promote, and inspire the people.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
That's formula, pluriversality as a universal project, is also worth to promote, highlight, and inspire the other people.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what.
It's not that I have the final word.
Yeah, and there isn't any only like a one solution for anything. That can be very much local, very much ancient perspective look as well. So thank you for speech, Professor, and thank you for also these distinguished participants. We have over 60 distinguished participants who can ask their question. So Q&A session started. So yeah. Currently, we don't have any question. So
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, please.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor Mignolo profusely. And
Sorry, Defne hocam, can you also introduce yourself?
oh, sure. This is Defne Demir, professor of literature, Western Lit, from Kültür University. And I wanted to ask Professor Mignolo if part of the decolonization project is to try and reverse the particular cultural hegemonies in the colonized or not colonized areas.
Okay.
So is it the cultural arena you are referring to, or the political?
Yes. So Selçuk, how you wanna take 2 or 3 questions and then answer, or what do you want me to?
Yes. Just answer this one, and also I want to also highlight that audience can ask their questions through the message, and then I can ask as well. So there's no need to just like speak and ask your question. Even you can ask in Turkish. I can translate to English to Professor Mignolo. So, Professor, floor is yours.
Okay. That is a very important question you ask in relation to the meaning of decoloniality. I will say decoloniality as a horizon in the 20th century, 21st century, and decolonization as the kind of implementation of that horizon. And I always talk in the vocabulary and the perspective of the Latin American decolonial school of thought. Quijano, in 1992, when he reoriented decolonization as decoloniality and as epistemological reconstitution, in a short article, he has 3 sections on the question of knowledge, on the totality of knowledge, the question of knowledge. And he was coming from Marxism, but at the same time, he was kind of contesting historical materialism. He was no longer accepting that the infrastructure structure is the economic, because the economy is also knowledge. So the question is that the question of knowledge become fundamental, because the economy is not only production, transaction, and distribution. You have to have a narrative that justifies certain way of production, of distribution, of labor. One example that is very well known is when the people in England were kind of supporting the end of slavery, because they were developing an economy that they needed wage labor, because slavery was no longer economically convenient. So the decolonial project today is, as we say, to change the term of the conversation, not just the content. Because if you change the content of the conversation, and that is what socialism did. What socialists did is to change the content of the conversation established by liberalism. And that was clear that will fail, because the rule of the game was established by liberalism. And in the long run, it failed. And that is kind of one of the difference between the socialist left and the decolonial. For us, the question of knowledge is fundamental, and that is why Quijano talked about decoloniality as epistemological reconstitution. And it's a lot to talk about that, and now we are talking about gnosiological reconstitution of epistemology, because epistemology is the control of knowledge by the disciplinary rule of modernity, be that disciplinary rule the Christian theology or the secular rule of the discipline that Foucault analyzed in the case of Europe. I think in that direction, that is one of the fundamental tasks, and that is need pluriversality, because, I mean, cannot be a center that will kind of reconstitute the Chinese knowledge in Mandarin or in Turkey or in Persian or in Russian. So each sector of the world involved in the decolonial consensus will contribute precisely from their own local history, be a local history that was settler colonialism or coloniality without colonialism, like in the case of China and Russia. But the question of knowledge is fundamental, because who control, we used to say, joking but seriously, because he who control money control meaning. And that is what is going today, is not just the conflict in Ukraine, the kind of the war, the military war, but the question of the conflict of narrative. Was the invasion unprovoked, or was the special operation provoked by the kind of expansion of NATO? So there are two narratives there, not just and the two narratives are now in the discussion of peace, because apparently the Europeans are unable to recognize that they have a lot of responsibility in starting this war. And that is a question of narrative. Cannot be solved by the arms.
Thank you, Professor. And we have a couple of questions in our message, and I will read directly. Yeah. First one is, given the rise of China and the United States in the economic and technological area, are we moving more towards witnessing a polarized world or a new colonialism? And other question is about, does the emergence of multipolar world, China, India, Russia, Latin America, Africa, weaken the colonial matrix of power, or does it simply redistribute control within the same colonial logic? If answer is yes for second question, how to ensure decoloniality in this period of time? And the third question about Turkey, but we can also speak other countries. So it basically says that if our mindset and epistemologically as well, if we colonize, how we are able to found, establish universality and local idea.
Universality, what?
Plurality and local ideas within this framework.
Yeah, could you read the first one? Because let me see.
The first one is about multipolarity between China and the United States.
Yeah.
Either these policies are going to recolonize the world between two powers. And second question is about if new multipolar world is aiming colonization by the different countries, how can we establish decoloniality? And third question, if our mindset is very much decolonized, how can we find plurality and local ideas? Yeah.
Oh, well, I think that we should go one question at a time.
Yeah, because three different questions are
yeah.
quite
So, but the
overwhelmed.
first one was about multipolarity and the recolonization of the world, right? So I think that we have to consider the narrative there. I think when in the West generally are saying that Russia is trying to reconstruct the old Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, I don't think he's trying to do that. And I would say, if he's trying to do that, what is wrong with that? Because the West is precisely trying to maintain the imperial power. So, and that's a question of narrative. How do we respond to that? The second thing we have to understand is it doesn't matter what the West think that Russia think. What is important is what Russia and China think. But the Western mind is prevent them to listen. It's the logic of the slave and the master. The master has only the reason of understand the reason of the master. The slave doesn't have reason. Doesn't have reason because it's inferior, and doesn't have reason because it's irrational. So that's the one thing. It's a dispute, not just in kind of dispute of the kind of the control of technology, control of the kind of the chain of distribution, etc. But it's a narrative, and I think here is very important. China is commanding the narrative, and that narrative is no longer the narrative of the zero-sum game. The narrative of the zero-sum game is the Western, from Christianity in the Renaissance to the secular transformation of and that is based on Western cosmology. But the Western cosmology, not the Greek cosmology that there was a kind of Olympus populated with a lot of divinities, feminine and masculine, was the kind of the Aristotelian logic of the first engine or something like that, taken by Western Christianity, Saint Thomas, and creating one God, and whoever is outside of that belief is a pagan, is infidel, etc., that cannot be listened. So that is a kind of a zero-sum game. We have to win. China is in a different narrative. China is in the win-win. And the win-win is in a different cosmology. It's the cosmology of the yin-yang. And the yin-yang is not um, it's not a binary opposition, but it's complementary duality. And that complementary duality is also common to all the indigenous cosmologies in the Americas, and I believe that it's in Asia and Africa also. So um, China is not trying to do what the United States say China trying to do. When the United States said that is what the United States want to do. Remember that every accusation is always a confession. Accusing China and Russia of being imperial is at the same time, no, no, no. The only people that have the right to be imperial is us. So the question is the dispute for the control of the colonial matrix of power. Multipolarities bring in a new narrative. And that creates a lot of problem for the West because they are losing the narrative. A
But
lot of it,
Professor,
yeah.
yeah, but Professor, you said like all accusation is also confession, but at the same time, Western hegemony, as Fukuyama highlighted, end of history, the last man. So basically, based on that perspective, the last man is not good because you have liberated person, democratic institutions. So isn't it good to be universal?
Is it good to be what?
Isn't it good for being an universal? Because based on the Fukuyama's perspective, the last man, you have liberated person, you have democratic institutions. So basically, isn't it good to be universal? That's the Western perspective. So what
Right.
would be your critics?
Well, that's what, if we want to maintain the universal, it has to be pluriversal.
Yeah.
So, pluriversality is the only universality that we will accept, because that universality will mean that the coalition of the
Mhm.
people who do not want to kind of obey one universal, and one universal that have a kind of owner, and that owner
Yeah.
is the West with the institution, the monetary fund, etc. So first we said we don't need a universal, but if you need a universal, it has to be pluriversal. So that is it. And the interesting thing here is that it's too schematic, but we have to think about that. That is the multipolar order that we are is irreversible unless there is a nuclear conflagration. But without a nuclear conflagration, you cannot stop multipolarity at the level of interstate relation. At the level of the public sphere is pluriversality. And that I think I think that the last question. I don't think
Mhm.
that universality at this point have any kind of possibility of influencing international relation. But it's very
Why?
important.
Because is it that?
Huh?
Because of the why? Because is it that? Because of the colonialism?
Because westernization, re-westernization is working at the level of big capitals,
Mhm.
big armies, big states, big institutions. Decolonial doesn't have that. Yeah, it may have an institute of research, may have a museum, may have the university. The university cannot be decolonized. We can do decolonial work in the university, but the university,
Absolutely.
the indigenous people of Ecuador trying to create the pluriversal the pluriversal Amautaiwasi. Amautaiwasi means the pluriversal house of knowledge. And
Mhm.
that was the kind of created from the perspective of indigenous cosmology and indigenous curriculum. But the state kind of repressed that. The state cannot. So, what is the second one? The second question was?
Was about yeah, I think you like you answered basically, because that question was about the other form of powers in the world politics, whether they inspired from colonialism or not. But the third question is about if our mindset is very much colonized, how can we establish decolonialism and universal idea?
That is very important question.
Yeah.
Because the decolonial, decoloniality, decolonization today is all over. Because coloniality is all over, so decoloniality is all over. And there are some kind of distinction to make there. There is a lot of people who talk about decolonization as decolonizing something outside of themselves. Like decolonize the university, decolonize the museum that I have been involved in the last couple of years. But they don't question about the colonial subject that is talking about the decolonizing the university. So decoloniality has to start by our transformation from colonial subject to decolonial subject. Ngugi wa Thiong'o in the mid-80s has a very nice formula, decolonizing the mind. That is our first task. The question is, how do we do it and how do we know? Well, we don't know. But in order to know that we want to decolonize the mind, we have to understand how coloniality has shaped our sensorium and our way of thinking. So the question begins by understanding how coloniality works. And to understand how coloniality works, it's not a question of definition. It's not a question of textbook. You have to think about how coloniality is affecting you. And coloniality affects us in a different way because of race, because of sexuality, because of nationality, because of religion, because of region of the world, because of belief system, etc. So how coloniality affects you. And when you begin to understand how coloniality affects you, you begin to understand how coloniality works. Because once you sense coloniality, the second is, where do you see it? Where do you see it around you? What do you see in the news, in the television, in the social media, in the mainstream media, in the university, in the government? So it's important part of our job to analyze the official discourse. I mean, what the kind of the Ministry of the Secretary of State of the United States say, or the Secretary of State of Russia, or the China, or the Turkey, what are they saying? We don't know what is going on under the table, but we have to kind of understand what is the narrative that is being built according to the understanding of kind of the dispute for the control of the colonial matrix of power now.
So yeah.
Question is, and the last question is, we cannot know by just ourselves when we are kind of moving into decolonizing our mind. That is a job that requires to work in collaboration, to make a coalition, and also to listen to the people who critique us. Because when we pay attention to the people who critique us, we ask, well, what is bothering them? What I am saying or doing that a postmodern or a Marxist or a liberal feel uncomfortable. So everything is relational, and we have to pay attention to that.
Professor, yeah, that's quite original. Why? Because what we missed right now in academia, in many fields, we miss the perspective of like looking holistically. Because what you are mentioning, you have to understand like your personal story, your territory, your nation, and the world politics as well. So we need holistic perspective to understand the colonial influence, then decolonize it. That's quite original. And secondly, in our Enstitü Sosyal, we are doing lots of research about society, like the birth rate, gambling, social problems. So, like let's say the previous decades. So when we have the social problems anywhere in the world, for the economy, for the society, most of the scholars, bureaucrats, politicians were giving reference to West. So because the solution is there. But currently, none of the scholars or the, let's say, the politicians or bureaucrats are using West only legitimate answer for this question, because West has not answer for these questions. Just
Right.
think about the birth rate issue of the Western countries. So that's why, like a life itself, pushing whole world to decolonize our mainstream paradigms. That will be one of the, I think, argument. What do you think about this, honestly?
Yeah, I think it's I totally agree with that. In relation to what you say, I always kind of smile at the title of Foreign Affair, for example. Foreign Affair always have solution. What Turkey has to do in this case, what Israel has to do with the Palestinian, has to do with African, has to do, right? And the second point of your question is that the university, we have been disciplined by the discipline. You have been disciplined in sociology. I have been disciplined in semiotics. Other people have been. So the discipline us. So the decolonial start by kind of disciplinary disobedience. So in that sense, we cannot decolonize the university, but it's very important to do decolonial work at the university. And disciplinary disobedience is one thing we have to think about. And we have to recognize this too. I mean, I retired just last year, but I've been like 46 years at the university. The university is using us. They give us a salary. So the question, we have to learn how to use the university for the question that I want to know, to do. The university is institutional and has the kind of regulation. And in certain sense, we have to obey for that. Because if we don't do what the university expects us to do, well, they kick us out. So the question is how to use the university or the museum or the whatever institution, the church, at the same time knowing that that the institution is using us. In that sense, decoloniality is the trick of the weaker, or the trick of the weak. At this moment, as we said before, I mean, the decolonial doesn't have big institution. The decolonial cannot be a state project because Evo Morales tried to do it in Bolivia a few years ago. But I mean, we kind of laugh at that and didn't work because the state want to impose their own view of decolonization. It's a state project. It's not a project of the public sphere, a project of the people. So in that sense, the coalition bringing consensus is important to think about.
Thank you. And Professor, I have many questions, and I will read all questions, and please answer in general because we have like
We are already in time.
we are already in time. That's why, and I do not want to miss also the questions. That's why I will read, and please you can do closing remarks after this.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah, please.
If we can copy the question,
Yeah,
then
sure.
I can answer by email.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can share with them as well. Yeah, thank you.
And that will also keep a record.
Yeah,
Of,
sure.
well, it's being recorded, but I think that it will give him more time to kind of address the question.
Professor, you're inspiring us a lot because like whatever I am asking you, you're sitting and writing and thinking. That's also incredibly like inspiring us. Thank you
Well,
again for answering these questions. But the first one, do you think ideology, whether it is religiously influenced or worldly, like a secularly, can be an option to decolonize the education, culture, and political system? Significantly and particularly, what do you want to tell about colonial mind and its decolonization in postmodern times? Another question is from the Professor Lasmoyo, who is the member of our scientific committee as well. Redemptive violence played a role in the decolonization projects in Africa in the 20th century. You have emphasized dialogue, alliances, strategic and effective solidarities in the decolonization praxis and consensus of the 21st century. My question is, whether do you place the question of redemptive violence in confronting coloniality and imperial designs in the 21st century? I think that's one of the key questions,
so
which is
where
quite,
do you
yeah,
place what? Where do you place what? I missed the word.
redemptive violence for the
Oh, violence. Yeah.
decolonization. Violence, yeah, because violence, as you know, is one of the key terms for the decolonization studies, which is inspired from the Fanon's perspective. So, yeah, the word universal comes from an armed uprising in the Chiapas, Mexico, called Zapatistas. So, basically, another question is highlighting this perspective, how like a violence should be part of this decolonization process. And thank you very much, Professor Mignolo and Enstitü Sosyal for making this informative event. My question is from a decolonial lens. How can countries like Turkey design a curriculum that delinks without reproducing Western universalism or sliding into romanticized cultural essentialism? What does a universal curriculum look like in such a hybrid consensus? And sorry for the other participants. I cannot read all questions because there are lots of the questions. I will share with Professor Mignolo, and he also wants to answer this question, and we will share with you. So basically, we can speak about redemptive violence in relation with the decolonization, whether it can be related to 21st century or not. Another question is about the curriculum. Yeah.
Uh, well, the question of education, very quickly, I think we have to distinguish between schooling and education. What the school does, the primary school, the secondary school, the university, is to school us. Education is the linking from schooling. Education has to take place in a different institution or within the university, but in a different manner. And in that sense, I'm saying that decolonial work can be done at the university. I did it for a long time with colleagues who were very, very conscientious about the distinction between schooling and education. The question of violence we're talking about, we have to talk about both. Physical violence and narrative violence. Narrative violence is very important. Look at what happened in United States with the kind of the manifestation, the student manifestation supporting the Palestinian. They were kind of a narrative in the manifestation, but that was responded with physical violence and the conceptual violence. Because physical violence, the police repress them, but also the university kind of, how can you say, accuse them of being constructed a narrative pro-Zionism against the people who were manifesting against Palestinians. So I think that both violence is unavoidable. And I don't think that a lot of people say that Fanon was kind of supporting physical violence. No, I think Fanon was analyzing that the decolonial cannot avoid violence. And both physical and conceptual, because the physical violence without the conceptual doesn't work. And that we learned that from Spivak. Spivak said the subaltern cannot speak. What the Spivak was saying, of course they speak, but they don't have a powerful narrative. And so the British narrative transformed the kind of the immolation of the widow as a kind of family relation instead of a kind of an act against the British Empire. So I think it has to be analyzed both. We live when we talk about violence, we still kind of think in terms of modern violence and in terms of Marxism. And I think there is a truth of that, but narrative is absolutely important. And it's a lot of examples. I take, for example, the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution was another kind of combination between physical action and narrative action. And that is why the kind of the question of decolonization, the coloniality of knowledge in general, but decolonization of a specific knowledge. How you experience them in Turkey, how you experience in Argentina and the United States, how you experience in China and Russia, etc. So that the coalition and consensus could be useful precisely to learn from each other and help each other to work into the area that we are working at, the kind of conceptual violence. Unless some of you are really ready to kind of to take the weapons and and go into the kind of the physical violence, because it's very easy for me to talk about physical violence here in a kind of the comfortable couch in a house in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that is a kind of peaceful place. We have to be aware of what are the possibilities, but also what are our limits and our possibilities, and is the conceptual violence. And I think that the decolonial, when it's decolonial, is violent, and that is why it's being not necessarily repressed, but disavowed, critique. They say, well, that's not important, that is romantic, that is etc. No? So I will think in those terms, the question of violence.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. We are already out of time.
Can you copy
yes.
the question and send it?
Yeah, we already copied it, and we are going to share with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And thank you again for participating this meeting, this conversation. And I do believe that if we have time, like 2, 3, 4 hours, even we can speak. There are many things to speak as well. And we have also decolonization forum soon in May 2026, but we would have more these kind of decolonial talks. And hopefully, as you highlighted that, even if there is a decolonial consensus, there would be in the society, in the public. So that's our job, to publicize it, to inspire the other people. Thank you again for this initiative.
Sergio, let me say that this is not a question of hours. Yeah, if we have more time, we can keep on talking another couple of hours. This is a question of months and years. And it's a question of our life. I mean, mine is shorter, yours is longer, but I mean, this is a long project. It's not a question.
It is.
Next week, we will decolonize knowledge. These are processes. And what you are doing is a very important moment. Yeah.
And Professor, even it is our childhood questions, because when we are kid and we are questioning the life, we are questioning the world system, and you're right, it is a question of life for like each person, not only here in Turkey, but also in the United States, in Carolina.
Decoloniality is a question of life, not as a question academic. It is in the academy, doesn't matter, but it's a question of life. When you understand decolonial is a question of life, you can be in the academy, but your attitude, toward your colleague, toward your students, etc., changes, because then education began. Because
Absolutely.
education is conversation, not
Yeah.
transmitting knowledge. It's conversation. That was my teaching for 35 years. And conversation that comes from Latin is con, together, versus turning around together.
Yeah.
So,
You know, and also in our language, conversation is a muhabbat. And muhabbat is originally Arabic, comes from the love, hub. So loving each other mutually, so sharing something in love.
that is your potential to use to work on Arabic and Turkish vocabulary. That is,
Yeah.
we cannot do it. We are limited in Latin America because we are descendant of European. The indigenous are very powerful. The
Yeah.
Africans, they are very powerful because they have a different vocabulary, different experience. But for us, it's more difficult. For you, you have a treasure there, Turkish and
Yeah.
Arabic.
Thank you. So plurality is going to save world. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Have a good day.